Next on the news, as we mark 10 years since Sandy, we look at the recovery in Breezy Point, a community in the Diocese of Brooklyn hit hard by the superstorm. And they haven't been able to cook in their kitchens for months because of a serious problem.
Right now, a home-cooked Thanksgiving meal seems impossible for residents in the Bland houses. They've had no gas for close to 6 months, left only with these hot plates to cook with. Now they're demanding answers from NYCHA and wondering how much longer they'll have to suffer. I'm Jessica Easthope. That story's ahead.
Also, the Knights of Columbus sending much-needed help for the people of storm-ravaged Florida. Plus, the man who loves both bicycling and his dog so much that he takes them along for his rides. I'm Christine Persichetti. This special edition of Currents News starts right now. Superstorm Sandy brought wind, floods, and fire and left a trail of destruction in the Rockaways. It's 10 years later, but the night the storm made landfall is unforgettable, when the beach town peninsula changed forever. For those who didn't evacuate, Breezy Point was suddenly inescapable. 40 survivors looking toward a small team of volunteer firefighters for bravery. Currents News' Jessica Easthope spoke with the chief at the time about the storm that defined his career.
The water was right about at this point, right?
It's been a decade, but Marty Ingram can still see it when he closes his eyes.
This rust right here is the result of the salt water that we drove through on the night of Sandy.
The chaotic scene playing out in front of him. Water surging through the doorway of the Point Breeze Volunteer Firehouse where he was chief. Survivors in life jackets and a firestorm in the sky.
Going into the clubhouse, that videotape is running in the back of my head. It's difficult.
The night Hurricane Sandy made landfall, an electrical fire started in one home, and within hours it had spread to 134 others. Carried by the storm's powerful wind, the damage to the Rockaways already unimaginable for Marty. And now he was fighting the biggest residential fire in Queens history.
It was truly a combat scene. The power lines were on fire. And, you know, if it was a Disney surround movie, it would have been beautiful. But this thing was real, and it was scary.
The peaceful peninsula, now a far cry from that moment on October 29, 2012. More than 1,000 homes and businesses were destroyed. Since then, the Rockaways have rebuilt, elevated more than 100 homes, undergone beach restoration, and erected protective sand dunes. But sometimes, Marty says, it feels like they're frozen in time.
Nobody trains you on how to handle it after the fact. Everything resurrected, you know, so it brought me back to that moment in time. For the faithful volunteers that helped us rebuild and give us hope.
Amid the devastation, the statue of Mary stood unharmed. Over the years, Marty says it's come to symbolize what he called a miracle.
And with all the devastation and destruction, nobody died. We said our prayers, and they were answered.
The storm couldn't wash away his faith. Just like Breezy Point, it's been built back stronger. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
Bishop Emeritus Nicholas DiMarzio led recovery efforts for the Diocese of Brooklyn, mobilizing emergency response crews and staff from Catholic Charities Brooklyn and Queens to help the thousands who were displaced by the superstorm. 10 years later, Bishop DiMarzio and I looked back at those efforts, the Bishop Emeritus recalling what went through his mind as he toured the devastation.
You see disasters on TV, but now this is in your backyard. So it was a big difference to see our churches that had visited all of them. You know, by that time was there 8 years already, and some of them were really hard hit. The most difficult thing was probably finding our priest, because they had to evacuate most of them, and we didn't know where they went, and we didn't have everybody's personal cell numbers. So we were searching for people for the first few days. It was a difficult time to live through, but we learned a lot of lessons, I think, too.
Yeah, I was going to say that. And, you know, Breezy Point in particular took a beating from the storm. You know, we were just talking about it. The wind causing the fire to go from one home to the next, flooding, so the firefighters couldn't get there to put out the fires. But there was a statue of the Blessed Mother that was in front of a home that was burned down. Here's the picture here. It's an iconic picture.
Right.
All of that devastation behind it, and the statue survived. What went through your mind when you saw that?
Well, I did see it in place because I was there the day after. And you can say, well, Our Lady was maybe protecting this area. At least there wasn't a great loss of life, thank God. A few people, but not what it could have been worse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I want to take a look at the response from the diocese in the weeks after the storm. Under your leadership, CCBQ had over 1,200 volunteers working 35,000 hours to help thousands in need. For the long term, you created a $2 million Hurricane Sandy Relief and Recovery Fund. How did you know where to even begin with the relief efforts?
It affected everybody, the poor and the rich. The area is very diverse. That whole coast area, there's, I guess, about 12 to 14 parishes. Actually, 16 are all along the coast there. So we were very vulnerable. So we set up the relief centers where people could get food, they could get clothing, other things that they needed. We had social workers working with them. Some people really were disoriented. They needed a lot more help. So it was a variety of things that happened. So we really mobilized between Catholic Charities, St. Vincent de Paul Society. Everybody really pitched in to do what was needed. There was emergency aid that was really very necessary.
And still now, 10 years later, some people are still going through that recovery process. How has the diocese continued the relief efforts to this day?
Well, some people, again, have not been able to rebuild, especially in Breezy where the houses were destroyed. The parishes are really the first line of defense. The parish church is where people, the rubber hits the road, where they really know the people, where they can get the kind of help they do. And Breezy is a place where there's continually issues that come up that the parish helps with, and other parishes in the same way.
Now we're still seeing one devastating storm after the other. What is some advice you can give to a diocese that may be going through this right now?
Well, learn the lessons you learned by the disaster. So we did have a disaster plan in place. Not everybody knew about it. Now we need to get people aware of it. That was the whole thing. We did another disaster plan afterwards, but I still think we still have to get people aware that there is something to rely upon. There's advice, there's emergency actions that you should take.
That was Bishop Emeritus Nicholas DiMarzio. You can read more about Bishop DiMarzio's recovery efforts following Sandy in this week's Tablet newspaper. Just pick up a copy at your local church this weekend. You can also get future editions of the paper sent straight to you by subscribing on thetablet.org. Friday, Governor Hochul marked the anniversary of Superstorm Sandy, remembering not just the impact of the storm, but the impact New Yorkers made in the following days.
We saw how God's people rose up all over this community to embrace each other and to take care of them and let them know they're going to be okay at a very real human level.
Mayor Eric Adams also used the anniversary to address climate concerns, breaking ground Wednesday on a new $522 million East River Resiliency Project in Manhattan. It's hoped that the project will mitigate rising sea levels and storm surges by adding flood walls and barriers along the Two Bridges waterfront. Schools across the country are also in recovery mode after the national report card showed many students are falling behind thanks to the pandemic. But those results also show Catholic school students are bucking the trend.
Good morning.
During the pandemic, Catholic schools in the Diocese of Brooklyn remained open, while public schools in the city and beyond kept shutting down. That may be the reason why Catholic school students did better than anyone else in the first post-COVID national assessment.
We are on the cusp of losing a generation of our children.
The National Assessment of Educational Progress reading and math exams looked specifically at 4th and 8th grade students and was the first since 2019. More than 50 states and jurisdictions took part in the assessment, showing the largest decline in math scores since the initial trial in 1990. No state or large urban district showed improvements in math, with some decline also showing up in reading scores.
If this is not a wake-up call for us to double down our efforts and improve education, even before the pandemic, then I don't know what will.
But when it comes to Catholic schools, while 8th graders did score 5 points lower in math in 2022 than in 2019, that was better than the 8-point loss among public school students.
You're feeling happy. I'm happy you're in first grade too.
In fact, Catholic school students' average scores remained 15 points higher than the average scores of their 8th grade public school peers in the assessment. In a statement, Lincoln Snyder, the president of the National Catholic Educational Association, says one of the reasons Catholic schools performed so well is that our teachers showed up for the kids. In every state, we were among the first to transition to distance learning, and after that brief time, also among the first to return students to a safe in-person environment. That's why I call our educators heroes. Let's take a closer look at the numbers. This graph from the National Assessment of Educational Progress shows Catholic schools outperformed public schools in almost all categories. From left to right, the average score in reading for Catholic school 4th graders was 17 points higher than the public school scores. 8th graders scored 20 points higher. In math, Catholic 4th graders did 11 points better, and 8th graders did 15 points better than the same grades in public schools. To enroll your child in the best education money can buy, just visit CatholicSchoolsBQ.org or call 718-965-7380 for more information. A Harlem man was stabbed in the back in an unprovoked attack in the subway. The NYPD says the 43-year-old victim was targeted Friday morning at Harlem's 125th Street station. He was taken to an area hospital with non-life-threatening injuries and is expected to survive. Police are still on the lookout for the suspect, who they believe is a man in his 20s. The attack comes amid heightened concerns about safety underground. According to the NYPD, as of October 17th, reported transit crimes increased 41% compared to the same time last year, jumping from nearly 1,300 in 2021 to just over 1,800 in 2022. City and state leaders are hoping to lower those numbers. Last weekend, Mayor Adams and Governor Hochul unveiled their latest plan to address the problem. It's called Cops, Cameras, and Care, and it calls for the installation of cameras in subway cars and a boost for mental health resources. It will also include an additional 1,200 police overtime shifts in the subway each day. But when Mayor Adams was pressed about whether or not additional officers will do any good, he had this to say.
We have to look at the totality of public safety. And what we have found in our analysis is that when that police officer makes that quick apprehension, he's preventing the repeated crimes. There's a small number of people who are repeated committing these crimes.
The mayor also wants to reduce the length of time it takes for a suspect to be arraigned. He believes that speeding up the process will keep more criminals off the streets and help others get the mental health services they need. One man was killed, another wounded in a shooting in the lobby of a NYCHA building in Manhattan. It happened Thursday night at the building in the East Village. Police say a 21-year-old man was fatally shot in the stomach. A 24-year-old man who was hit in the leg was taken to the hospital and is expected to survive. There have been no arrests so far. Meanwhile, at the Bland houses in Flushing, Queens, residents have been unable to cook on their own stoves for the past 6 months. Their gas was turned off in May for repairs, and it hasn't been on since. Current News' Jessica Easthope spoke with 2 residents who say this is just one of the many issues they face in their NYCHA nightmare.
This is what they want to cook a turkey in. All right.
Vanessa Sumter and her husband, James Proctor, look forward to hosting their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren for Thanksgiving every year. When their gas was shut off on May 3rd, they never thought,
there you go,
this year it wouldn't be possible.
So-called hot plates that they give, which don't last.
Vanessa and James haven't been able to cook anything in their oven or on their stove
Already burnt out.
for the last 6 months.
I'm trying to survive. And cooking on these hot plates is just getting to me. I'm beginning to feel like when I do start back cooking, I won't know how. We got a hole here.
A leak in the main gas line is what prompted NYCHA to shut off the gas in the Bland houses in downtown Flushing. Since then, 80 families have been relying on hot plates to cook.
You see that? It's rocking, so I have to level it out.
Vanessa and James both need to stick to a strict diet. James is a diabetic.
All this food here, and I can't even use it.
Since May, they've spent more than $1,000 on outside food. With inflation and the recent rise in food prices,
I've really been crying.
it's money burned.
It's breaking us. You know, it's taking us to the poorhouse.
Vanessa and James have lived in the same apartment for 22 years. And they say having no gas is only the latest in a long line of issues.
And this is what we have to do in the bathroom. And that was freshly painted. The water boat's coming out there. This, which is probably mold.
NYCHA told them they're ineligible for food stamps or any financial assistance because they didn't have a welfare case open before the gas was shut off.
We don't have money to go to the restaurant. So once again, we're being let down.
Vanessa says it's been one disappointment after another, and now her holiday season feels ruined before it's even begun.
You ain't making no Thanksgiving dinner on 2 hot plates on those stoves. It's overwhelming because I really had my plans for Thanksgiving.
Currents News reached out to NYCHA about when the gas would be restored. A spokesperson didn't offer a timeline, but said the outage is still in the permitting and construction stage.
No gas. Once again, thank you, Housing.
In Flushing, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
Are you also a NYCHA resident experiencing a serious problem in your building? You can email us at newstips@desalesmedia.org or call our 24-hour number, 718-517-3122. There's a lot more news headed your way. They are knights in shining armor for hurricane victims in Florida, how one Catholic charity is helping. Plus, nearly a year after the Christmas parade tragedy in Wisconsin, victims' families are finally getting some closure. And heartfelt letters from students who survived the Uvalde school shooting delivered to Pope Francis. His response when we come back.
The state of Florida has come to an agreement with FEMA to expedite debris removal on private and commercial properties.
The people of Florida with a long way to go in the cleanup after Hurricane Ian. A network of Knights of Columbus has boots on the ground amid the devastation that remains in southwest Florida after the monster storm. In the Diocese of Brooklyn, the Caring Knights are marking 10 years since they started helping with recovery efforts after natural disasters. Currents News' Jessica Easthope has their story.
They're only sending what's being requested. Nearly 1 month after Hurricane Ian made landfall in Florida, the state's deadliest storm since 1935, people are still desperate for the essentials because thousands are still homeless.
And our thing is that after all of the TV stations are gone and the news stations are gone and everybody thinks it's okay, that's when we step in.
Charles Shelley is the disaster relief coordinator for Caring Knights, Inc., a group of Knights of Columbus who mobilize after natural disasters.
Soap.
Collecting donations, shipping them down, and often going themselves to help those in need.
Until you witness the devastation, the pictures and the news do not give it justice.
That giving really was the catalyst of Caring Knights. And we built a network. It's still going. We tapped into one of the great resources of our churches.
In Lee County, which includes Cape Coral and Fort Myers, and took a direct hit from the Category 4 storm, nearly 500 people are still living in emergency shelters. More than 5,000 residential properties were destroyed there, and more than 13,000 suffered major damage. Damage from the storm could reach $80 billion. After every natural disaster, the Knights are reminded of the first one that brought them together almost 10 years ago to the day.
Where we started is where we still are. We started here at St. Finbar's because it was the hub for Coney Island and for the Rockaways, which was devastated by Sandy.
The Knights have seen firsthand how long recovery from a powerful storm can take, and they remember who was there when they needed it.
That's the reason why we do this, to help those that helped us, to give back. Pay it forward.
The shipment of essentials is enough for at least 50 families. It will travel by trucking from the Diocese of Brooklyn and be received by Knights of Columbus in Bradenton, Florida, at Saints Cosmas and Damien Parish. In Bath Beach, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
You can still help the people of Florida thanks to a special fund set up by the Diocese of Brooklyn. Just mail a check payable to the Compostela Fund of the RC Diocese of Brooklyn and mail it to Diocesan Finance Office, 310 Prospect Park West, Brooklyn, New York, 11215. Money donated will also go to recovery efforts in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic. It has been nearly a year since Daryl Brooks drove his SUV through a Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin, killing 6 and injuring dozens more. And now the victims' families are finally receiving some closure.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Daryl E. Brooks, Guilty of first-degree intentional.
The jury returned a verdict Wednesday, finding Brooks guilty on all charges. The 6 victims killed included an 8-year-old boy and several members of the Dancing Grannies. The family of Granny Virginia Sorensen was in the courtroom Wednesday, and they brought her ashes with them.
We've been praying for this day for a long time, and this morning my 5-year-old daughter came up to me and handed me this necklace with my mom's ashes in it, and she told me to take my mom with us for the sentencing. So she was with us today.
Brooks faces a mandatory sentence of life in prison for the homicides. He was also convicted of 61 counts of reckless endangerment, among other charges. Shortly following the verdict, the Catholic community of Waukesha called it another step on the road to healing, saying in part, "We continue to pray and support the families and individuals who will spend their lives overcoming the loss of loved ones, innocence, and trust. It is within the healing presence of our Lord Jesus Christ that we take the next steps. Our faith will carry us forward as individuals and as a community." Pope Francis is helping survivors from a school shooting after the former students at Robb Elementary sent him handwritten letters. The words and drawings came from students who transferred to Sacred Heart Catholic School, which facilitated the letter writing project. The authors and artists include kids who were shot and survived, as well as those who lost loved ones during the massacre last May. A letter written on behalf of the Holy Father thanked the kids for their letters and said he will keep them and their families in his prayers. Still to come on Currents News, instead of taking his dogs for a walk, this Alaska man takes them for bike rides. We'll show you when we come back. We've all seen cyclists in the city pull off some pretty crazy stunts, but one Alaskan man has been turning heads in the most adorable way by combining his love for bike riding with his love for dogs. David Allgood takes a look at his doggy joyride.
Doing good.
From a distance, you might think that's a person on the front of that bike.
Going down the road.
But a closer look at these two, that's right, that's a doggy in some cool goggles.
Biking down the road.
Let's just call them doggles. This is...
My name is David Jensen, and I like to ride bikes with my dogs, Salt and Pepper.
David loves his bike and his dogs, and today it's just this cool cat, a canine, looking like a Zoolander model, hair blowing in the wind, those oversized and stylish sunglasses.
What I most find surprising is people who are not bikers and would normally not pay me any attention will look at me and go, "That's cool."
The name of the dogs are
Salt and Pepper.
You get that? Salt and Pepper. And although Pepper didn't ride today, she rides. So how does all this start? Release the hounds.
Hi, guys. Hold on. You're going to knock the camera over.
So excited, goggly grunts. Salt is happy. But before he loads in, he's got to goggle up.
And Salt will jump in, and they just sit there. It's not like they're trying to get out or get away from anything. It's just
Why would he when he's got a perfectly good human to pedal him around? Dave does have a day job at Providence, Alaska Medical Center, so this was all about multitasking.
The two loves I like to do. I like to bike and I like to play with my dogs and have fun.
So like all good things, the ride has to end just for today for this easy rider.
Paparazzi dog.
Paparazzi.
Paparazzi.
That was David Allgood reporting. Jensen says that while he loves showing off his dogs, his commute is now a bit longer because of all the people asking for pictures. Too funny. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.